GPS. Habakkuk. Go? Okay. We are continuing our study of the prophets, and we are now officially halfway through the minor prophets. Now, we did Jonah a while ago, but we've now gone through Jonah, Amos, Hosea, Micah, Nahum, and Zephaniah. Tonight, we're going to go through Habakkuk. I know that that's a prophet we all just know and love very dearly. We have the 8th century Assyrian prophets, right? Jonah, Amos, Hosea, Micah. I've given you a handout. You can kind of see where they are chronologically, where they overlap, at least how I understand it. And thus far, we are now in the 7th century with the prophets who are ministering under the threat of Babylon. So we've got Nahum, Zephaniah, and tonight Habakkuk. Now, just to lay everything out as cleanly as we can, we've already talked about Nahum, and in particular, he is not only looking back on the judgment of Israel, but also the conquest of Assyria, as well as judging Assyria. He is also giving our initial prophecies regarding Babylon. Someone is coming to deal with Assyria. Of course, we know who that will most likely be, which is Nabopolassar, the first emperor of the third Babylonian Empire. And we then have Zephaniah, who we know was ministering during the time of Josiah, right? He's a cousin of the king, and he is also warning them of the coming Babylonian threat, even though Assyria is still very much around. And now we have Habakkuk, and it appears as though Habakkuk is writing during the actual activities of Babylon. It seems like at this point, Assyria is actually gone, and now Babylon is on the march. So we've gone from Nahum prophesying into the future, at least that's what we believe, to Zephaniah, who is during the emerging of Babylon, to now Habakkuk, where Babylon's on the move. So that's kind of how we're laying all that out. Nabopolassar, he either himself or at least was involved in the destruction of Nineveh. That's in 609 BC. And it's not long after Nabopolassar starts moving westward. And he's going to conquer most of the Assyrian territory, which will eventually include Judah. I am comfortable saying, and I've got excerpts, this is from the BKC series, that says that most scholars will put Habakkuk either during the time of Manasseh, which would put us back in Nahum's time, or Josiah's, which would put us during Zephaniah's time, or Jehoiakim, which puts us where I think he is. And it seems like the majority of scholars right now are happy saying that he's writing during the time of Jehoiakim, which is where we are on that timeline. So you can see how they all nicely just line up like ducks in a row. Nahum kind of towards the end of Manasseh's reign, Zephaniah at some point during Josiah's reign, when we don't really know, and then Habakkuk sometime during Jehoiakim's reign. I am comfortable saying, although this would be very narrow and it's hard to justify, that he might be writing, or his main sermons, oracles, might be in this very significant window between the destruction of Nineveh and the invasion of Judah. But that only gives us about a 4 to 5 year window. That's a very narrow window. So the idea could be, or at least the occasion could be, Nineveh's gone and everyone's happy about that, and he's warning them, you think that's a good thing, but Babylon's not going to be satisfied with just taking out Nineveh. So here we've got a relative timeline that I've shown a couple of times, and you can see, which is moderately significant, that you got kind of Nahum, who's in the mid-7th century by himself, and then you have Zephaniah, Habakkuk, and Jeremiah all around the same time. They are most likely contemporaries. So regardless of when their ministry is specifically, in terms of just when they were alive and when they were functioning, they're probably alive during the same period. They may know each other to some extent. In fact, I think it's more than likely Habakkuk is aware of Jeremiah, possibly knew Jeremiah, considering how important Jeremiah was. So, yeah. So here we've got Zephaniah, Habakkuk, and Jeremiah, most likely, again, contemporaries. Zephaniah is probably a little older than Habakkuk, maybe the same age as Jeremiah, roughly, just to give us all some kind of context, that they're all alive during the same time and ministering roughly around the same time. So, we begin with, we start the book, Habakkuk, and I'm going to kind of subtitle this, The Calm Before the Storm. Again, I see this as, we misuse the term halcyon. It's a beautiful word. Halcyon refers to a period of calm between two cataclysmic events. So, for example, you might say the years between World War I and World War II were a halcyon period, right? Kind of this calm where things settle, but they're not really over, and everyone kind of knows it. So Nineveh is gone, but Babylon's about to be on the move. And so we're kind of, that's where I see the context for this book. So we're just in these few-year period. The book is pretty straightforward. It's just 3 chapters. And there's not much to say about the outline because they're pretty self-explanatory. You have the first chapter, roughly, which is a series of questions that more or less Yahweh will answer. You then have a series of woe oracles. We'll get to that. And then, interestingly enough, he ends with a doxology, which is very curious and very interesting. There are a couple of ways to approach Habakkuk. And the way that I've kind of set it up and I've talked about is I see Habakkuk as one of the tell me why prophets. He likes to ask questions. And I see him as sort of a response to Nahum. Nahum has his own questions, namely, why is God so mad at Assyria? Especially, why is God mad at Assyria if Assyria has done what God told them to do? And Habakkuk is going to have his own questions, mainly about Babylon. Another prophet we could kind of parallel him to and we could understand him in relation with is Micah. So Micah is ministering and living during the destruction of Israel. And so he is writing most likely right before it or right during the onset of that destruction. Habakkuk is most likely living right up to the destruction of Judah, and in fact his book was probably written right before the destruction. So he's seeing it happen in real time. So Micah is experiencing the destruction of Israel, and Habakkuk is experiencing the destruction of Judah. Also, it's not insignificant that Micah, his time overlaps with Isaiah, who also lived through the destruction, as well as Habakkuk, who is living through the time of Jeremiah. And Jeremiah, of course, lives through the destruction as well, of the destruction of Judah. But there's another book we can compare this to, and it's probably the most significant, but it's not a prophet. Habakkuk has a lot in common with the book of Job, because he is going to deal with the question of theodicy. It's a very fancy word. Basically, it means God's judgment. And he's going to ask questions about God's judgment. He is going to directly question God's judgment, kind of like Job does. He is going to get some answers, kind of like Job does. But what's especially curious is his conclusion will be different than Job's, which is where we'll end up tonight. So, the book begins, the oracle that Habakkuk the prophet saw. Now, of course, we may ask, who is Habakkuk? Bless you. The answer is we don't know. He doesn't tell us. We've got no other reference. We have no idea, nothing else to situate him other than a few vague references within the book, namely that the Chaldeans, that is the Neo-Babylonians, they are on the move. So they are alive, they are well, they are a threat. Almost certainly Nineveh is gone, and now they have to deal with this new rising power in the east. So verse 2. Oh boy, what a great opening. How long, Lord, must I call for help and you do not listen, or cry out to you about violence and you do not save? So, for whatever context, is he talking about the violence within the city? He wants God to deal with that. Is he talking about the violence related to the Babylonians? We don't know. He doesn't tell us. But there's clearly an issue that he wants dealt with. Most likely, he's dealing with the own injustice within his region. Because we're going to get to the answer. So he wants God to deal with the evil, the wickedness that he sees, and he's not happy that God hasn't been dealing with it. Now, we have seen over and over again the prophets warn us, you shouldn't make these kinds of prayers, because when God finally deals with it, you may not like the way he deals with it. Amos warns us of that. There are plenty of other examples. David, in some of his Psalms, will ask similar questions. How long will you forget me? How long will you abandon me? And so on. Usually these end very positively, but the questions are still thrown out there. But again, most notably is going to be Job. Job is going to ask this multiple times, so in chapter 19, and I believe every time I quote Job, it is directly from Job. So if you think, well, they're the three friends, Huey, Dewey, and Louie, they ask all kinds of weird things. We're not dealing with them. We're dealing with Job. What is Job saying? Because he is the righteous one, right? So chapter 19 of Job. I cry out violence, but get no response. I call for help, but there is no justice. He has blocked my way so that I cannot pass through. He has veiled my paths with darkness. This is a pretty harsh indictment against God. Now, the thing is, you can ask questions of God. He doesn't mind that. You can even ask some rather striking questions, like what Job is asking. The issue is, sometimes God answers. And you may not like the way he answers. First of all, you may not like what he answers with, but you may not also like the way he answers. There are plenty of times he answers questions from the prophets like Jonah, Elijah, and so on, and you may not like the way he answers or what the answer itself is. We know with Job, he's not too happy with the way God answers him. And I think Habakkuk is going to be a little shocked, too, at the answer. So, his first question, why do you force me to look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrongdoing? Oppression and violence are right in front of me. Strife is ongoing and conflict escalates. This is why the law is ineffective and justice never emerges, for the wicked restrict the righteous. Therefore, justice comes out perverted. Tell me, none of you have ever said about these words. You think about our country, you think about where we are socially, and you go, God, why don't you deal with this? Here's Habakkuk asking that question for you. And Habakkuk is going to get an answer. So if you ever wondered, why doesn't God give me an answer? Probably because he already has answered this question. You just need to read your Bibles. Read the prophets more. God's answer. Look at the nations and observe. Be utterly astounded, for something is taking place in your days that you will not believe when you hear about it. So what exactly is he talking about? Well, most likely he's talking about the Assyrians. The Assyrians, who have become the dominant power. They've just about conquered the world. They even conquered Egypt, which no nation had ever done before. They were unstoppable, right? They thought of themselves as they were going to create an empire that would never end. Verse 6, I am raising up the Chaldeans. So God is going to raise up someone to deal with the Assyrians. We already knew this. We had a very similar situation with Amos, because again, Amos is a great beginning point to the prophets, because Amos raises some of these same questions, objections, and so on. And one of the things he brings up is be careful when you wish for the day of judgment, because eventually God will bring someone to clean up the problem. And when that happens, you probably won't like it, because you might get caught up in the cleaning. So Amos, he's warning people. Don't make that prayer, because you won't like it. And he says, he's raising someone up. Now, with Amos, it was the Assyrians. He was going to bring the Assyrians to judge Israel and to judge all the other nations. And here's Habakkuk saying, God, why aren't you going to deal with this problem? And God says, I am. I'm going to bring the Babylonians. So verse 6, "Look, I am raising up the Chaldeans, that bitter, impetuous nation that marches across the earth's open spaces, to seize territories not its own. They are fierce and terrifying. Their views of justice and sovereignty stem from themselves." So they define their own justice as opposed to, they don't see God as the source of justice. They don't see the law, meaning the Torah, as justice. It is just whatever they think is right in their own ways and in their own customs. So we've kind of already alluded to this, but I think we talked about this with Nahum. You've got the Assyrians. They're all powerful, supposedly. And you've got Nabopolassar. He's the son of one of the regional governors in what is essentially Babylon. And he makes a deal with the Elamites. So Babylon is the purple. The Elamites are the orange. And he also makes a deal with the Medes. They're the yellow. And the plan is, we're all going to rush Nineveh. Nineveh is the dark blue, kind of to the northeast. Because if we all attack at once, they can't stop all of us. The Babylonians are not strong enough on their own to take on Assyria, although Assyria is already weakening. It's already overspread itself. It's already exerted itself too much. It's already breaking up. This is kind of their opening to attack. The Elamites are not a particularly powerful nation. They're kind of there on the edge of the eastern desert. But because a lot of trade goes through there, they're very wealthy. And so they have a lot of means that way. They have mercenaries and so on. And then you got the Medes, who are a very powerful group. They've been largely hidden from world history up to this point. This is kind of their first major event where they team up with the Babylonians against the Assyrians. And it's not entirely clear who exactly destroyed Nineveh, although Nabopolassar, right, the eventual king of Babylon, he will take all the credit. And the Bible basically gives him the credit, so we'll go with that. But the three of them team up. You have this alliance, which is also significant because the Babylonians and the Elamites, they hate each other. They've been hating each other for 1,000 years. They've never worked together. But they hate the Assyrians more, right? As Nahum tells us, right? Everyone hates the Assyrians. So the Babylonians, the Elamites, the Medes, they all team up. They rush into the heartland of Assyria. They take out Nineveh. And just about overnight, it's not quite overnight, but pretty close, the Assyrian Empire just collapses because the capital's gone. They kill the king. And according to Greek history, which some ancient historians don't necessarily believe, but the general setup is the Babylonians and the Medes, we don't know quite what happens to the Elamites, they make a deal and basically divide up the Assyrian territory. The Babylonians get the southern half of the territory, the Medes get the northern half. How much you can see from this map, about how much the Greeks claim that the Medes claim that they had, that's a lot of territory. Did they really control all of that? We don't really know. But more importantly, you've got the Babylonian. That's kind of the green to the south. They had that. The Babylonians have claimed what is essentially the old Akkadian territory. And as you can see, it goes all the way down into Syria, which will include the Levant, which includes Israel and Judah. So they take over all that territory. And because of this, Assyria is gone. They're just no more. Goodbye, bye-bye. They're destroyed. Verse 8. Their horses, these are the Babylonians, right? Their horses are swifter than leopards and more fierce than wolves of the night. Their horsemen charge ahead. Their horsemen come from distant lands. They fly like an eagle, swooping to devour. All of them come to do violence. Their faces are set in determination. They gather prisoners like swooping to devour. Violence. Like sand. So this, of course, is one of our days of the Lord. We had our previous one under Amos. We had the Assyrian day. And now we are experiencing, at least within the scriptures, we are experiencing the Babylonian day of the Lord, which Zephaniah warned us about. Right? The Babylonians are coming, and they're going to wipe out everything. So, Amos, right? Amos 5:18. Woe to you who long for the day of the Lord. What will the day of the Lord be for you? It will be darkness rather than light. This, of course, is the Assyrian day of judgment, and then Zephaniah. The great day of the Lord is near and rapidly approaching. Listen, the day of the Lord. Then the warrior's cry is bitter. And he goes on. Very similar statements, and again, just it's not going to be good when this finally happens. Verse 10, they mock kings, and rulers are a joke to them. They laugh at every fortress and build siege ramps to capture it. We don't have a whole lot of references or depictions, explanations, or whatnot from the Babylonian sources. We know the Assyrians did this. They had all kinds of elaborate ramps and siege engines and so on. This is a depiction from the siege of Lachish, where the Assyrians built ramps, and they went up the ramps to take over the wall. Presumably, the Babylonians must have had similar equipment, technology. Maybe they're using the Assyrian technology now that they're gone. But again, this is stuff we would normally associate with the Assyrians, but the idea that the Babylonians have adopted this or they're using their own kind of technology shouldn't surprise us. We know it was being used at this time. Verse 11, then they sweep by like the wind and pass through. I love how we've had Nahum, Zephaniah, and Habakkuk, and they have all described what is coming. This great, we'll say, wave of the Babylonians that are going to come by. But they each use a different metaphor. So Nahum describes them as a great flood. It's going to come by and wash everything away. Zephaniah describes them like a broom, sweeping up all the dust and whatnot. And now Habakkuk is describing them more like a tornado. It's just going to come through and destroy everything and blow it all away. The image is roughly the same. It's just we're using different metaphors to describe it. Right? We get the idea. Verse 11, they are guilty, their strength is their God. So the God of the Babylonians, now all of a sudden we have kind of a new God on the horizon. That is Marduk. Right? We've had all kinds of other gods. We've had Molech and Baal and so on. But the main God of the Babylonians is Marduk. And we have tons of texts. They are very proud of their God. They are kind of a henotheistic society, meaning that they worship one God over the others, and they see Marduk as the true king of heaven. Well, not heaven. He's the true king of the earth. I got to clarify that. But he is Lord over everything. He is Lord over other gods. So when Habakkuk says this, this is not too out of shape from what we would expect the Babylonians to actually believe. And you can see, like, this is a depiction of Marduk. He's got, he's a warrior. I assume that the things in his hands, they're pronged. I think that these are like lightning bolts, kind of like Zeus. He's a thunder god, just like Zeus, Jupiter. I'd say Thor, but he's got his hammer. But he's a storm god. They all are depicted pretty much the same way. We will get storm god imagery in a second. Okay, so we had our first question. The first question is, God, there's injustice everywhere. Why aren't you going to deal with it? And God's answer, I'm going to deal with it. I'm going to bring someone in to deal with it. I'm going to bring in the Babylonians, and they're going to deal with it. Okay, next question. Are you not from eternity, Yahweh, my God? It never hurts, when you're asking someone a superior a question, it never hurts to butter them up. My Holy One, you will not die. Lord, you appointed them to execute judgment, my rock. I love this. Like, he keeps going back to the flattery. It's like, my Holy One, you will not die. Lord, you appointed them to execute judgment, and then my rock. Like, he keeps going back and like this. He doesn't want to sound disrespectful of what he's about to ask. You destined them to punish us. Now, you should be able to figure out where he's going with this. He goes on, your eyes are too pure to look on evil, and you cannot tolerate wrongdoing. So why do you tolerate those who are treacherous? Why are you silent while one who is wicked swallows up one who is more righteous than himself? So I'll translate what he's saying. Are you crazy? How can you justify using the Babylonians, who are, as you admit, a wicked, evil people, not only to take out the Assyrians, who admittedly are probably more wicked and evil than the Babylonians? So when he says you're going to use a wicked people to take over a righteous people, that's not entirely accurate, at least not yet, because he's using the Babylonians to judge the Assyrians. Okay, we get that. But it's not going to stop there, because what Habakkuk is worried about is what's going on in his own home country, right? So God is going to use the Babylonians to judge Judah. That's what he has a problem with. So the question is, to frame it another way, how is it that God, who is a righteous being, how can he use an unrighteous tool and still call it righteous? That's what Habakkuk is asking. So it's okay to use, okay, so logically, it's okay to use, so a cop, you're a cop, right? It's okay to plant evidence. It's okay to use bad methods to get the right verdict. Again, it's not exact metaphor, but you get the idea. Can you bend the rules, or can you do things that are considered questionable to get the results that you want? If you're God, okay, fair enough. If you're God, you can do that. We talked about this before. We have the kind of the primary attributes. God is holy, he is righteous, and Habakkuk isn't questioning that. God is holy, God is righteous. The Babylonians are not. So why use the Babylonians? Now, he doesn't bring this up with the Israel issue, because that's already been done in the past. His main issue now is with Judah. So this is the next question. This is the question that's going to kind of propel the rest of the book. Oh boy, back to Job. Job 19. If he snatches something, who can stop him? Who can ask him, what are you doing? God does not hold back his anger. Rahab's assistants cringe in fear beneath him. How then can I answer him or choose my arguments against him? So this is Job, and he's kind of in the middle of his speeches, but he's asking, I think it's very much in parallel with what Habakkuk is asking. Namely, if God were to do something questionable, like what Habakkuk is drawing attention to, how do we even call him out about that? Who can, even theoretically, who can hold him accountable if he were to break his own rules? The answer is you can't. He just kind of does what he does. So, verse 14. You have made mankind like the fish of the sea, like marine creatures that have no ruler. The Chaldeans pull them up with a hook, catch them in their dragnet, and gather them in their fishing net. That is why they are glad and rejoice. We don't have a whole lot of reference, as far as I can tell, in Babylonian literature of this sort of metaphor. But what is significant about this is we have almost the exact same metaphor in Jeremiah. So, again, Habakkuk and Jeremiah are contemporaries, so they're probably pulling from the same thing. Habakkuk may be referencing Jeremiah here, or at least using a metaphor or analogy that he heard from Jeremiah. It's unclear. But in Jeremiah 16, I'm about to send for many fishermen. This is the Lord's declaration. And they will fish for them. Then I will send for many hunters, and they will hunt them down on every mountain and hill and out of the clefts of the rock. And of course, his fishermen, his hunters, are the Babylonians that he's going to send to hunt down all the evil, wicked people. Verse 16, that is why they sacrifice to their dragnet and burn incense to their fishing net. For by these things their portion is rich and their food plentiful. Will they therefore empty their net and continually slaughter nations without mercy? The general sense seems to be that they basically worship warfare. They worship the act of warfare. They worship the act of going out and hunting down their enemies. I'm not questioning that. The Assyrians are generally described as the ones who are particularly vicious and vengeful and so on. We do know of nations that did sort of worship war, the Spartans probably most famously. But the point is the same, and the point is well taken, that the Babylonians are a vicious people, and they're not going to back down, especially after all the years of oppression by the Assyrians. So they're going to get their revenge, and it is going to be brutal. Chapter 2. I will stand at my guard post and station myself on the lookout tower. I don't know if this is literal. It could be a metaphor. We have seen before other prophets describe themselves as the watchmen, those on the wall, waiting, watching. We've had all the major prophets, pretty much, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel. Of the minor prophets, we've had Hosea, Micah, and now Habakkuk. Most famously, of course, is Ezekiel. He loves to use the watchman imagery. But what exactly is he watching for? I will watch to see what he will say to me and what I should reply about my complaint. So he's waiting, he's watching, not for the enemy. He's waiting for God to respond. So he's throwing out his complaint, he's throwing out his question. Why is God justified in using the Babylonians? And he's still waiting. This is from Job. If only I knew how to find him so that I could go to his throne. I would plead my case before him. I would fill my mouth with arguments. I would learn how he would answer me and understand what he would say to me. I assume some of you, most of you, have at some point in your life had the thought, if I could just go and see God and give him a piece of my mind. I know you're like, I would never do that. Maybe at some point, probably. Here's Job admitting it, that he kind of wants his audience. He wants his 5 minutes to tell God what he feels, what he thinks about what he's doing. Chapter 31. If only I had someone to hear my case. Here is my signature. Let the Almighty answer me. Let my opponent compose his indictment. I would surely carry it on my shoulder and wear it like a crown. I would give him an account of all my steps. I would approach him like a prince. This is from Job. So he's saying, he acknowledges in one of his speeches that he can't, right? He wants to go before God. He wants to plead his case. He wants to complain to God's face about all the things God has done wrong. And here in another speech, he admits, I can't do that because God's up in heaven. But if I had someone who could, if I had that advocate, then he could go for me, and he could then plead my case, and he could let him know, all the horrible things he's done to me. We're going to get answers. Verse 2. We get God's answer. The Lord answered me, write down this vision, clearly inscribe it on tablets, so one may easily read it. For the vision is yet for the appointed time. It testifies about the end and will not lie. Though it delays, wait for it, since it will certainly come and not be late. That just about sums up all the prophecies of the Bible. It's coming. It will delay, but it won't be late. I don't know how it delays and is not late, but that's that, right? It's not going to come when you think it's going to come. It's not going to come when you expect it, but it will come when God wants it to come. Well, I don't find that very satisfying, but there you go. That's just what we have to accept, and that's what Habakkuk is going to have to accept. But we're going to see how Habakkuk answers to this. Verse 4. Look, his ego is inflated. He is without integrity, but the righteous one will live by his faith. Of course, he's contrasting Habakkuk. He's contrasting the righteous with the Babylonians. The Babylonians are arrogant, they're obnoxious, they're vicious. And in contrast to that, you've got the righteous, right? This is something we've seen repeated over and over again. Hosea, let whoever is wise understand these things, and whoever is insightful recognize them, for the ways of the Lord are right, and the righteous walk in them, but the rebellious stumble, right? And even Job, right? Even if he kills me, I will hope in him. I will still defend my ways before him. Yes, this will result in my deliverance, for no godless person can appear before him. So Job is going to maintain his righteousness, even if he dies in this world, knowing that eventually he will get his chance to talk to God. He will get his chance to meet God, if not in this world, then in the next. Right? So he's going to maintain his righteousness. He's not going to abandon his faith, even though he feels like he's not being treated correctly. Verse 5. Moreover, wine betrays. An arrogant man is never at rest. He enlarges his appetite like Sheol, and like death he is never satisfied. He gathers all the nations to himself. He collects all the peoples for himself. He's still describing the Babylonians. And what he seems to be saying, at least what I think he's saying, is the Babylonians are basically going to destroy themselves. The Babylonians are going to keep conquering. They're going to keep growing. They're going to keep taking things. This was the problem with the Assyrians. Yes, God had given them the right to judge. He had given them the right to rule, but they were too greedy. They expanded themselves further than he wanted them to, and eventually they brought about their own destruction. This is true of pretty much every empire in world history. Eventually, they essentially collapse themselves. There's just about no exception to this rule. Take that however you want. Verse 6. Won't all of these take up a taunt against him, with mockery and riddles about him? They will say, woe to him who amasses what is not his, how much longer, and loads himself with goods taken in pledge. So all the other nations are going to not be happy with the Babylonians, and they're going to rise up against the Babylonians. Right? They're going to wait for their time, and they're going to go against the Babylonians. The Babylonians, essentially, they're not going to rule forever. He's not giving them the world. He's not going to let them just take over everything and be around forever. So this is a temporary measure, essentially. We've had similar indictments against general wickedness, evil, social unrest, and so on. Amos, hear this who trample on the needy and do away with the poor. He's talking mainly about Israel, but this is clearly an indictment that can go beyond Israel. Micah as well talks about judgment against the wicked and so on. So God is not going to let this not be dealt with, essentially. So verse 7. Won't your creditors suddenly arise, and those who disturb you wake up? Then you will become spoil for them, since you have plundered many nations. All the peoples who remain will plunder you, because of human bloodshed and violence against cities, against lands, cities, and all who live in them. So, even though the Babylonians, right, they're going to replace the Assyrians, they're going to rise up, they're going to conquer everybody, and they're going to make everyone else their enemies. They're going to turn on them, and they're going to wait for their downfall. Right? They're going to hate the Babylonians the way that everyone else hated the Assyrians before them. So this was kind of the issue at the end of Nahum, right? Now that Assyria is on the decline, all the nations around them are cheering for their destruction. And what we end up having, kind of going back to that picture, you've got there's the picture of the big fish, right? And it's being attacked by all the little fish. So that's kind of Assyria, right? Assyria had made so many enemies, had made so many people mad, that you had these ancient rivalries, such as the Babylonians and the Elamites working together to destroy them. So, again, Assyria kind of laid the foundation for its own destruction, and Babylon's going to follow suit. Verse 9. Woe to him who dishonestly makes wealth for his house, to place his nest on high, to escape from the reach of disaster. You have planned shame for your house by wiping out many peoples and sinning against your own self. For the stones will cry out from the wall, and the rafters will answer them from the woodwork. This is going to be this is chapter 2. This is going to be a continued series of laments. You could call them laments, sort of a satirical part lament, part judgment against the Babylonians, right? So verse 12, woe to him who builds a city with bloodshed and founds a town with injustice. Is it not from the Lord of hosts that the people labor only to fuel the fire and countries exhaust themselves for nothing? For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the Lord's glory as the waters cover the sea. So while this is directly aimed at the Babylonians, it seems in this section, this can also be a fairly general statement. It can also apply to Judah. And I'm not sure why it can't apply to both. Namely that Judah has become corrupt. We know this from Zephaniah, right? Judah has become filled with wickedness and social unrest and so on. And God has to deal with that. He's also going to deal with the Babylonians, that's true. But it's all going to happen in its time. Verse 15, woe to him who gives his neighbors drink, pouring out your wrath, and even making them drunk in order to look at their nakedness. You will be filled with disgrace instead of glory. You also drink and expose your uncircumcision. The cup in the Lord's right hand will come around to you, and utter disgrace will cover your glory. So, again, he's continuing his statements of woe. He's making it clear that whatever injustice you inflict on others will be brought to you, that God will eventually bring condemnation on you. Again, it may not be right now, but it will eventually happen. Verse 17, for your violence against Lebanon will overwhelm you. The destruction of animals will terrify you because of your human bloodshed and violence against lands, cities, and all who live in them. Again, this is aimed mostly at Babylon. I like that the line, the destruction of animals will terrify you. That, again, they're eventually going to have to answer for all the crimes that they commit, not only against Judah, but against the other nations and against creation itself. Verse 18, what use is a carved idol after its craftsman carves it? Is it only a cast image, a teacher of lies? For the one who crafts its shape trusts in it and makes idols that cannot speak. This is an interesting little segue. We've already had Habakkuk mention, right, their strength is in their God. Presumably we're talking about Marduk. And so after we get this series of woe oracles talking about, woe to this and woe to the injustice and so on, Now we're going to get this kind of rhetorical question. What use ultimately is this carved idol? Again, I assume we're talking specifically about Marduk. What good is Marduk going to be for the Babylonians when the time of retribution is at hand? We've kind of already seen this batted around, this idea. Hosea, of course, brings certain indictments against the use of idols. So in Hosea 4, my people consult their wooden idols, and their divining rods inform them, for a spirit of promiscuity leads them astray. And Micah as well, all her carved images will be smashed to pieces, all her wages will be burned in the fire, and I will destroy all her idols. So general condemnation. We've also got Isaiah. It's mainly, if we want to get to the places where we get the most discussion about idols, it's going to be Isaiah and Jeremiah. So Isaiah, throughout the book, he's talking about idols and the problem with idols and just general disdain. But in chapter 40, who will you compare God with? What likeness will you compare him to? To an idol, something like a smelter casts and a metal worker plates with gold and makes silver welds for it. To one who shapes a pedestal, choosing wood that does not rot, he looks for a skilled craftsman to set up an idol that will not fall over. Of course, in chapter 40, we get the famous, he's describing the idol and all the skill that goes into making it and how beautiful it is and so on. And the basic question is, what good is it, right, in the end? Because in the end, it's just an idol made by the craftsman. It's no more than just a statue that's, an ornament. Verse 19, woe to him who says to wood, wake up, or to mute stone, come alive. Can it teach? Look, it may be plated with gold and silver, yet there is no breath in it at all. We come from a point in history where this kind of seems obvious to us, but this is his indictment against the idols, indictment against the false gods. This is very reminiscent, again, of Jeremiah. So Jeremiah has a lot to say about the false idols. So in chapter 10, everyone is stupid and ignorant. Jeremiah speaks to my soul. I love Jeremiah. Every goldsmith is put to shame by his carved image, for his cast images are a lie, there is no breath in them. Very similar to Habakkuk, right? They are worthless, a work to be mocked. At the time of their punishment, they will be destroyed. Jacob's portion is not like these, because he is the one who formed all things. Israel is the tribe of his inheritance. Yahweh of hosts is his name. So I think the shifting with Habakkuk is he's going through all these oracles, and he then starts talking about idols, mainly, I assume, he's talking about Marduk, right? Because in the end, when God decides to bring judgment on the Babylonians, who's going to stop him? It's not going to be Marduk. There's not going to be anyone to stop him. Verse 20. But the Lord is in his holy temple. So this is in direct contrast with the idols, right? So he goes through the woe portions, talking about, woe against the injustice, woe against this, woe against that. And then he shifts to the idol, right, about how worthless idols are and what's the point of idols and so on, probably speaking mainly about Marduk and what use is Marduk going to be for the Babylonians. And now we're talking about Yahweh. Yahweh is in his holy temple. Yahweh has substance. Yahweh is real. He has a place of residence. We have seen this stated before, probably most significantly in Micah. So back in chapter 1 of Micah, listen, all you peoples, pay attention, earth and everyone in it. The Lord God will be a witness against you, the Lord from his holy temple. Now, Micah, when he's describing this, is describing it very much in regal language, right? Yahweh is the true king of Israel. He's up there in his heavenly palace, and he is coming down to earth in order to bring judgment on the land. He's going, of course, this is representational of the Assyrians, but also he's going to use the Assyrians to bring judgment on Israel, but he's also coming down to rule once all the damage has been done and the dust is settled. Continuing on, the Lord is in his holy temple. Let everyone on earth be silent in his presence. We've also seen this before, Zephaniah. So that was last time. Be silent in the presence of the Lord God, for the day of the Lord is near. Indeed, the Lord has prepared a sacrifice. He has consecrated his guests. So the Lord is real, and he is coming. I think that's the point, right? And even in the Babylonians, even in the emergence of the Babylonians, this is still an act of Yahweh's coming. And so, now he says we should be silent. I almost feel like he's talking perhaps about himself. Maybe he needs to be a little more silent. because again, I see these parallels between Habakkuk and Job. Job, for the majority of the book, right, he's in a series of dialogues, debates with his friends. And it goes through multiple cycles where they all kind of go around talking about issues. Eventually, you get this hothead Elihu who starts spewing his thoughts. And then Job has one final, his own little final speech. And then finally, God shows up. And God's like, I'm tired of listening to all this. Now, the one he actually calls out is Job. And the reason why is because Job, of all of them, is the righteous one. He's the one who speaks with authority. And God's tired of what Job is saying about him. He doesn't care about the friends because the friends are all idiots. Like, they can say whatever they want. He's worried about Job. Which, there's a lesson in there. Right? If you're not one of God's righteous, God doesn't care as much because you're not one of his. If you are one of his, he's going to have a lot more to say about what you say in his presence or about him. So he's concerned with what Job is saying. And I think he's going to be concerned with what Habakkuk is saying. So chapter 3. A prayer of Habakkuk the prophet according to Shigionoth. So this, again, feels like an abrupt shift. This is clearly a shift. This is a prayer. It's song-like. It's poetic. We have gone through the initial series of questions, right? He had mainly the two questions. The first question is, what are you going to do with all the injustice and evil and whatever that he sees? God's answer is, I'm going to bring the Chaldeans, the Babylonians, to deal with it. Well, second question, why are you sending the Babylonians since, they're evil? And his basic answer is that this is part of prophecy, and you just need to wait and see. And so then he goes through the series of woes, right? Woe to the Babylonians, woe to the injustice, and so on. And then he kind of ends that section recognizing that in the end, the Babylonians are serving this idol that is not going to be of much help to them, whereas he serves a living God. And now we're going to have a very stark shift. And I think that the whole be silent in the presence of God is significant because he takes that as a sort of coming to God moment. Just like Job. And when God shows up, Job is silent as well. So with chapter 3, we're going to get the proper response. So we've had this, I think that's important to see this in somewhat of a logical way. He has raised complaints against God, right? He's not just asking questions, he's complaining. God has given him an answer. He's not happy with the answer, but he has his answer. Job also raised complaints about God. And he also had he also got his answers. Answers that he wasn't happy with either. Now we're going to see what Habakkuk's response is. Because Job and Habakkuk, I think they're going to go through similar, we'll say, journeys, similar situations. The main difference, however, of course, is that Job is suffering on behalf of himself, right? He is the one who's being punished, right? He's the one who's lost his family, he's the one who's suffering, and so on. So this is a personal experience for him. Habakkuk, I think, is more of a communal experience. He is suffering on behalf of the city, on behalf of the other righteous, because he's a prophet. So one is a little more self-centered in his criticism, whereas Habakkuk, I think, is more communally centered. But the series of events are similar, right? They are articulating their frustration with God. They raise criticisms directly against God, and then God answers them, and now we're going to see what the responses are. So, chapter 3, a prayer of Habakkuk. Lord, I have heard the report about you. Lord, I stand in awe of your deeds. So this is coming right after God is in his heaven. He recognizes the presence. He recognizes the personal appearance of God. If this is referring to the Babylonians or something else is not clear, but God has revealed himself, and the proper response, of course, is silence. And now this is what comes after the silence. So, I've heard the report, and I stand in awe. This, to me, is also a very nice, not a conclusion, but this is sort of the next, we're initiating a new phase of the prophets. So, up to this point, this is part of my own personal theology, we have seen the fear of the Lord kind of develop as we've gone through them. So, Jonah, right, because his book is mainly about judgment and revelation through judgment, I think perhaps the most important chapter, at least in a broader theological sense, is the first chapter. where God has revealed himself to those on the boat. He's revealed himself to Jonah, his disobedient prophet. He's also revealed himself to the sailors, and particularly the sailors, right? Because they have never experienced Yahweh before. But now that they've experienced Yahweh, their response is to be afraid of him, but then to offer sacrifices, which is the proper response, right? That's how you should respond to Yahweh when you are in his presence. And then you've got Amos. So we move down to the next book, and the lion has roared. The lion being Yahweh. Yahweh has revealed himself in judgment. He is bringing judgment on Israel. And the rhetorical question is, when the lion roars, who is not afraid? We saw that with Jonah and the sailors. God will say roared, but the storm comes, which the sailors recognize as the presence of God, and they're afraid. They offer sacrifices. But Amos, the Israelites, right, they have experienced, we'll say, the roar of Yahweh. They're not afraid, and that's a problem. And so then you get to Hosea, which is the next book. And not only do they not fear Yahweh, they don't fear the king, they don't fear anybody. It's just getting worse. So then we get to Micah, who reminds them, right, the king is coming. And when the king comes, you need to be afraid. And then we get to Nahum, where, and particularly in chapter 2, but we get, where is the lion's lair with nothing to frighten them away? So, because I'm forcing them all into my little theological wheel here. But part of the condemnation against the Assyrians is that they don't fear anybody. And they've been acting without fear. They don't fear God. They don't fear anything. And so they've been doing whatever they wanted to. And it's that lack of any awareness that is ultimately going to bring them to destruction. And then we get Zephaniah, who beautifully says in chapter 3, I thought you would fear me and accept my correction. This is kind of, in my opinion, kind of towards the heart of the book, where he's just laying out, I've done all of these things. He's talking to Judah, right? I did all of this with Israel. I brought judgment on them. I revealed myself through judgment. And ultimately, Judah, who saw all of this, who experienced all of this, should realize Yahweh is real, and I should probably be afraid of him. But now here we are in Zephaniah's time, and they're not afraid. So the cycle is sort of starting over again, only now it's with Judah. But this is Habakkuk. And Habakkuk, of course, is representing the more righteous part of Judah. And he's levied his complaints, he's got his answers, and now in his reflection, he's afraid. He is demonstrating the proper response. Right? This is the response that the sailors gave back in Jonah. Revive your work in these years, make it known in these years. In your wrath, remember mercy. This is not an easy thing to pray. Because I've heard the report, I stand in awe, and now, instead of complaining, right, instead of asking his questions, he is just saying, do what you got to do. Reveal yourself in whatever fashion that may be. Whatever you have to do, because it's not just about the judgment. We saw this going back to Jonah. I know we didn't start with Jonah, but we did that earlier. It's not about the judgment, it's about the revelation. God is revealing himself, and Habakkuk is just accepting it. This is about him revealing himself to the Judeans. And whatever you got to do to reveal yourself, I'll accept it. Just be merciful. Verse 3, God comes from Teman, the Holy One from Mount Paran. His splendor covers the heavens, and the earth is full of his praise. His brilliance is like light. Rays are flashing from his hand. This is where his power is hidden. The light coming from his hand is probably like lightning. So this is significant, I think, because we've already mentioned Marduk, at least indirectly, right? The Babylonian god, who is a lightning god, who's a storm god. But now we've already shifted, right? Marduk isn't real. He's just an idol. God is real. And now we're back to talking, but now we're describing God as the warrior, God as the storm god. And I just think it's funny that light shoots from his fingers. He has like lightning fingers. It's May 4th. I get one Star Wars reference. So lightning like shoots from his finger like the emperor. I thought it was funny. Deuteronomy 33, this is the blessing that Moses, the man of God, gave the Israelites before his death. He said, "The Lord came from Sinai and appeared to them from Seir. He shone on them from Mount Paran and came with 10,000 holy ones with lightning from his right hand for them." So we've already had God described not only as a warrior, but also as this kind of storm god figure, that he is the one who controls the storm, he is the one who has all the power, and so on. And I think that this is, we could say, subversive to a degree, that the Babylonians believe that they're serving the true storm god, and now Habakkuk is saying, no, we got the real God who controls the storms, basically. And we've seen this language before as well, notably with Micah and Isaiah. So Micah 1, the mountains will melt beneath him, and the valleys will split apart like wax near a fire, right? When the king shows up, when he comes, creation itself just kind of bends over, right? Creation just melts away. And Isaiah, of course, every valley will be lifted up, and every mountain and hill will be leveled. The uneven ground will become smooth. The image is, right, valleys are normally low, but the valleys are going to come up. They're going to rise up because he doesn't want to step down. He wants a smooth path. He's not going to climb over the mountains. The mountains go down for him. It's like one of those cartoons where, the figures have to clear everything away for the figure, the king or whatever, so they have to move everything around and such. Verse 5. Plague goes before him, and pestilence follows in his steps. He stands and shakes the earth. He looks and startles the nations. The age-old mountains break apart. The ancient hills sink down. His pathways are ancient. I see the tents of Cushan in distress. The tent curtains of the land of Midian tremble. So, destruction follows. It comes before him. This is fairly similar to what we've seen with Micah. Job 26, the pillars that hold up the sky tremble, astounded at his rebuke. By his power he stirred the sea, and by his understanding he crushed Rahab. By his breath the heavens gained their beauty. His hand pierced the fleeing serpent. These are but the fringes of his ways. How faint is the word we hear of him. Who can understand his mighty thunder? So Job also describes God in this kind of way. Verse 8, are you angry at the rivers, Lord? It's a great question. Is your wrath against the rivers? Or is your wrath against the sea when you ride on your horses, your victorious chariot? You took away the sheath from your bow. The arrows are ready to be used with an oath. I love this little bit. We're back to rhetorical questions, but these are silly questions. So he just described all of this, right? That Yahweh is great, he's powerful, creation itself just kind of does whatever he says. And so now he says, when you show up and all of these things happen, right? The destruction, the thunder, the lightning, and so on. And he goes, when you show up and all this happens, are you mad at the rivers? Are you mad at the mountains or whatever? Well, no. First of all, you're just showing up. But when he does unleash his wrath, it's not on account of creation. He's not trying to reveal himself to creation because of Judah. All of this is for Judah. Verse 9, you split the earth with rivers, the mountains see you and shudder, a downpour of water sweeps by, the deep roars with its voice and lifts its waves high, sun and moon stand still in their lofty residence, at the flash of your flying arrows, at the brightness of your shining spear, you march across the earth with indignation, you trample down the nations in wrath. You come out to save your people, to save your anointed. You crush the leader of the house of the wicked and strip him from foot to neck. You pierce his head with his own spears. His warriors storm out to scatter us, gloating as if ready to secretly devour the weak. You tread the sea with your horses, stirring up the great waters. Verse 16. I heard and I trembled within. My lips quivered at the sound. Rottenness entered my bones. I trembled where I stood. Now I must quietly wait for the day of distress to come against the people invading us. So, he begins, this is the doxology. For those who don't know, a doxology is a song of praise. So he begins by saying, reveal yourself. And let me just accept whatever happens. And then he goes through all this imagery of Yahweh the warrior, Yahweh the powerful, Yahweh who can do whatever he wants. Creation itself is powerless in front of him. And he uses this power, first of all, to judge Judah when Judah misbehaves, but also to protect Judah. And now we get to the end of 16. I must quietly wait for the day of distress. I just have to wait. I have to wait and see what's going to happen. This is very reminiscent, although I don't think it's quite as good, but it's very similar to what Micah says. And because I have sinned against him, I must endure the Lord's rage until he argues my case and establishes justice for me. He will bring me into the light. I will see his salvation. Again, Micah lived through the Assyrian invasion. And now Habakkuk is about to live through the Babylonian invasion. And they're saying roughly similar things. So, as I've said, this is Habakkuk's response to the whole dilemma. Here's Job's. 42. I know that you can do anything and have no plan of yours can be thwarted. This is after God has rebuked Job. You asked, who is this who conceals my counsel with ignorance? Surely I spoke about things I did not understand, things too wonderful for me to know. You said, listen now, and I will speak. When I question you, you will inform me. I had heard rumors about you, but now my eyes have seen you. Therefore I take back my words and repent in dust and ashes. All Job can do is apologize. That's the end of the book. I mean, that's really the end of his speeches. So we get to the end, and all the debates, everything just boils down to him apologizing to God. Like, yeah, I shouldn't have said some things I said. So that's Job's response, right? Here's Habakkuk. Though the fig tree does not bud, and there is no fruit on the vines, though the olive crop fails, and the fields produce no food, though there are no sheep in the pen, and no cattle in the stalls, yet I will triumph in Yahweh, I will rejoice in the God of my salvation. Yahweh, my Lord, is my strength. He makes my feet like those of a deer, and enables me to walk on mountain heights. And then for the choir director, this is something that was meant to be sung. He wrote this. This is also significant, right? Like, why do we need this? This wasn't a personal prayer. He didn't write this for himself. He wrote this for Judah. He wrote this for the righteous in their meetings to sing this together. So, what is different? Again, I see a lot of parallels between the situation of Job and the situation of Habakkuk. I see very similar situations in that they are both dealing with what they see as sort of unfairness, that what's going on in their lives as not necessarily being played out in the way that they think it should. And so they have questions of God. And they even have complaints about God. And they also get their answers. But what's particularly important is the responses that we get. So with Job, right, after he goes through all the speeches, after he goes through his whole situation, after God has finally revealed himself, and basically, to boil down his speeches, it's basically, how dare you question me? And all Job can do at the end is just apologize. You're right, I shouldn't have said it. I need to just accept what happens. I take back my words, I'm sorry. Habakkuk doesn't apologize. And I think, this is part of why I think Habakkuk is so important for us canonically and why we need to look theologically. I think Habakkuk gives us the right answer. It's not that Job is necessarily a bad answer, but it's not really the right answer. Again, all he can do is just apologize. Habakkuk's answer, right, after all is said and done, after his situation, after his questions, his criticism of God, because God can be criticized. You can ask him questions. You can even ask him, why are you doing the things you're doing? You can even say, I don't really like the way you're doing it. He's okay. He can take it. Habakkuk doesn't apologize. He never apologizes. He never says, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have asked the questions. He asks the questions, and he asks the questions on behalf of Judah. The issue is his response. His response is, holy, holy, holy. That's all he's got. That's all he can say. And again, bringing us back to Micah, because this is the end of Micah. It's a great ending. But I will look to the Lord. I will wait for the God of my salvation. My God will hear me. Again, this is Micah about to experience the Assyrian invasion. And this is the end of his book. So with that, we'll end our study of Habakkuk.
All right. John, would you close us in